I wanted to get in here, an industry kind of relation, and we talk off camera about the difference between medical and recreational cannabis. Do we want to do a little segment, and do you want to intro really what your vision of both are? And of course there's different businesses, but really talk about the differences, other than just the, hey, what people can picture. Well, recreational cannabis is me going and buying some pot and smoking it. Meanwhile, the medical kind of side of it. Do you want to do a little intro,
Yeah,
and we'll go
sure.
from there?
I think there's many ways to look at it, and I think it goes back. Let's start with the company. The company that is producing the product, as we were saying earlier, has to do with the ethos, the DNA. A company like Avicanna takes a more medical pharmaceutical approach. So we look for consistency, we look for product stability, we care about the shelf life stability, we care about the bioavailability. We want to have products that are going to provide relief without necessarily having an intoxicating effect if possible. So formulations that are higher CBD, formulations that if they have THC, it's still controlled and dosed. Formulations that because the dosing is accurate, we can do titration. That's the kind of stuff we think about as a medical and pharmaceutical company, even though we're dealing with cannabinoids. An adult use company is competing in who has the highest amount of THC today. And that's fair. I mean, on the adult use side, that's great, but that's a very different ethos. It's a very different philosophy. Also, for a company like us, when we sell a product and a patient learns to use that product and actually gets benefit from that product, ideally can solve some unmet medical needs with that product, I have a responsibility to make sure that product is always available to them. Because let's say in the circumstance that a patient is weaned off their opioids or has reduced their opioid use because they've been able to incorporate cannabis into their medical regimen, we need to ensure that that product is stable and that product is safe and that product is available to them. An adult use company, that's not the focus. The adult use company is to sell as much as they can and to replenish when they can. And that's from a company's perspective. From a consumer's perspective, I think if you look at the OCS, Ontario Cannabis Store here in Canada, the sales are generally men between the ages of 20 to 30. This is who you would imagine as your cannabis consumers. But if you look at a portal like Medical Cannabis by Shoppers, it's actually women. It's not just men, and it's older age, it's older demographic. So these are people that don't want to walk into a dispensary. These are people that are speaking to a physician, a clinician that is giving them recommendations and dosing guidelines, and they're actually using medical cannabis for medical purposes. So you're starting to see that separation in the companies. You're starting to see the separation in the kind of consumers you have on both sides, and you will now see much more separation in the marketing approach. A medical company's marketing approach is in education, training, dosing, titration, which clinical indications or comorbidities may benefit from a particular product, where adult use is about, this is a very cool brand, it's a cool concept, it's high THC. So the advertising, when permitted, will be different. The marketing will be different. The sales force is very different. Ideally, the channels where the products are purchased is a pharmacy versus a dispensary. So these are the separations that I think are needed. And I think because the cannabis industry has been such a frenzy in the first couple of years, everybody tried to be everything to everyone. And that's really not the case. You don't see Johnson & Johnson producing whiskey. You don't see Diageo producing tablets for pain. Companies are doing what they're good at, right? And that's what their focus is, that's where their ethos is. And that's why I think with Canopy getting more and more let's say control from Constellation brands, you're starting to see their focus is getting away from medical and their focus is going to where they want to be, which is the adult use, the beverages, and the recreational use. So those are the major aspects, I think, of the separation of the industries, and I think you will see that more and more in other countries.
Yeah, from an outsider, obviously not nearly as much of an expert as you. It's incredible. You even separated it based on the structure of the company. Based on the marketing team, the sales team, like you said. Where a recreational use company is, oh, how can we make this packaging look great, look out there so people buy it off the shelf. Meanwhile, you're on the other side, the marketing company that you hire for what you would think is a medical use is more of a, okay, how can we market to people who have these symptoms, who can benefit from the uses like this, right? And I think
it's to the physicians, right?
Yes.
So it's more like a medical sales team, right? And you have very different product life cycles. So an adult use this is a really cool, genetic, let's grow it. The THC content is at 30%. Let's grow it, dry it, put it in a bag and sell it, and we have a new SKU, right? On a medical side, it's 2 years of R&D. We have a new formulation. It has a sustained release effect. This is great for a high THC product for someone that has chronic pain. You know, when you build that out, is the product stable? Is the product's ingredients approved? Can we produce that in a stable content? Can we then manufacture that with a contract manufacturer that meets our guidelines? Can we go through that? Once you go through all of those things, then you have a bottle of tablets versus a bag of weed. It's a very different life cycle, right? So these are the major differences that are not always captured. And when people want to, for example, compare a company like ours, they're saying, well, Ross, you're generating less revenue than the recreational companies. Yes, but I have a very different process and have a very different life cycle. But once my products are in the market, my consumers are a lot more loyal, because a patient is perhaps the most loyal consumer, because that's a consumer that is relying on your products and is not going to go shop around. Where an adult use consumer is like, well, I tried that flower, it was great. Now I'm going to go try that flower, right? And this is the kind of point that I want to make, that there is very specific separations. And I think most cannabis companies haven't figured that out yet.
Yeah, no, interesting. And I'm gonna ask, and curious then, when people come to you and they say, hey, what's the difference between Avicanna and some, a place like Canopy? What do you say?
We're a pharmaceutical company. We work with cannabinoids. They're a cannabis company.
Yeah,
that's the simple answer, right? That's the most simple way to explain it. My life cycle is different. My entry barriers are different. Once I'm there, and I get my products approved, those are patented formulations that have gone through clinical development. You can't just replace my products. It's a very different process, right? And again, people think it's all the same, but it's really, really not.
Yeah, no, interesting. I love the fact you touched even on the patent part right there. You mentioned, it's really what's the hot topic today, and really trendy, more from a recreational standpoint, where you come from a medical standpoint, and it's a lot harder to replace. Competition, there's big barriers to entry and all that kind of stuff. So fantastic. Look, thank you so much for giving insight on that topic. Is there anything else you wanted to say about medical versus recreational before we close things off?
Just last comment. There's only really two markets today that recreational significantly matters. And I'm going to sound like arrogant by saying this, but it's Canada and the United States. In Canada, you have adult use. In the US, you have at a multi-state level adult use. The rest of the world is medical. The rest of the world, the legislation, if you want to look at countries like Colombia, Mexico, as of recently, Ecuador, Peru, Argentina, Australia, United Kingdom, Germany, they're only medical. Right? So everyone is focusing on adult use and recreational use, but that's not an exportable product. The United Nations Convention on Narcotics doesn't permit the export of narcotics for recreational use. So I think the adult use market is a great market. I think it's a great investment if you have the right company, but you're limited to those very specific markets, where medical is global. It's beyond national, it's international. And I think the prospects in the near term for medical is completely underrated.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Well, that's a good little teaser for potential videos to come, and you crushed it. We can go through the regulatory climate in future videos and talk about, things you're seeing. And, again, this is where I love to invite people. If you have any questions, please drop them below. We do expect to do a Q&A video coming up, and I would love to mention a ton of questions that I see in that video. But I think this was great. Ross, thanks so much for joining. This is an awesome video.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me again.